The NRDC Action Fund always knew the 2014 election cycle would be difficult, but one thing remains consistent. Voters want action on climate change. In fact, exit polling showed 6 in 10 voters believe climate change is a serious problem. We know that candidates who run clean will cut through the deceptive ads and be supported by voters who want a cleaner environment. As part of our 2014 election analysis, we bring you the environmental champions in their own words. I'm Heather Taylor Measley, and this is Running Clean with U.S. Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. During the 2014 election cycle, you talked a lot about climate change and clean energy on the campaign trail. Can you talk a little bit about how you originally became interested in these issues?
Grassroots politics was a big part of the campaign, and I take the job of being a representative very seriously, and that means you've got to be in communities, you've got to be talking to folks, and we wanted to show that in the campaign, and we wanted to connect with folks with issues that they cared about, and sometimes it varies depending on the community you're in, but I will say that clean energy and climate was something that was relevant to everybody, no matter where I was in the state. In Michigan, the Great Lakes is something that's very sacred. People have it in our DNA that the Great Lakes are something that we are going to treasure and enjoy now, but also pass on to future generations. And so anything that's a threat to the Great Lakes is a threat to everybody in Michigan. And there's no question that climate change is a significant threat, not only to the entire planet, but to the ecosystem of the Great Lakes. And it was important to talk about it in the framework of Great Lakes because that would touch people's heart and their emotions in a much more effective way and bring the challenge of climate change, which when you talk about it sometimes sounds kind of academic and kind of theoretical, but if you can really personalize it to something that people care very deeply about, like the Great Lakes, it was very effective.
Polls consistently show that voters really value clean energy and environmental protection and are more likely to support politicians who support these things too. Do you think that being a clean energy candidate communicates something larger about your values?
Well, I think talking about clean energy is about broader values. Certainly the environment is important, but it talks about you're caring about future generations. To me, a part of what elections are is about really focusing on the essence of what the American dream is about. And the American dream is about if you work hard, you play by the rules, you will have a better life for yourself, and you hope that your children will do a little bit better than you did. And in the process of handing off that baton to the next generation, people understand that leaving an environment that's cleaner than what we had is very, very important. So as I talked about climate change, I always try to not talk about it in theoretical ways or in academic ways, but how this is actually very good for Michigan, that dealing with climate change in a proactive way can actually be good for our economy because it'll drive an industry. You know, in Michigan, we are one of the leading producers of solar cells and technology, which is surprising to a lot of people, especially in Michigan, because we're a pretty cloudy state, and folks wonder, how do we do the solar technology? But we have companies that are designing cutting-edge technologies, solar shingles, all sorts of systems, and creating jobs in our state, good paying middle class jobs. We shouldn't be afraid to have with the challenge of climate change, we should embrace it as an opportunity to grow our economy. And that's the vision that I painted in the campaign, and people want to hear that in the campaign.
One piece of time-honored political advice is make it local. How do you make clean energy issues local to your constituents?
Well, it was very important for us to show that when you're talking about the environment, it is about something that's impacting a local community. And actually, I had a situation in my congressional district with the accumulation of a material called pet coke that was being piled up along the Detroit River. Pet coke is the residual when you refine Canadian tar sands oil. In fact, for every barrel of oil that you get from tar sands, up to a third is this pet coke. And pet coke is considered the dirtiest of the dirtiest fuels. Well, we don't burn a lot of it in the United States. We burn some, but usually they put it on a ship and they send it to China, and they burn it in China, then it goes in the air and comes back to us. But this pet coke was piled up along the river. It wasn't contained. It was blowing into people's houses. I had my constituents complaining about respiratory issues. Small businesses were complaining to me. This was no longer an academic issue for people. This was a real issue. And they could really put themselves in the shoes of those people who lived in that neighborhood that had this stuff blowing into their houses and going into their lungs. And they said, we're not going to stand for that.
What steps do you think the environmental community should take going forward to build relationships with Michiganders?
I think the most important message for folks in the environmental community, and one that I care, or that one that I believe very strongly, is that sometimes we get forced into this false dichotomy that you can be good for the environment and you're bad for business. That's not the case. Being good for business and good for the environment is all one and the same thing. We've seen it time and time again. In Michigan, we have a wind energy business. We have solar energy business that are creating good paying middle class jobs. And we're doing what's great for the environment while at the same time creating great jobs for middle class families to be able to provide for their family and provide all the opportunities that everybody wants for their family.
Republican leaders in the Senate appear poised to attack every environmental law that's out there. They already have. How do you think that you can work with other senators across the aisle to protect your people, their air, their water, wildlife, and special places?
So I think it's more important now than ever to be engaged in this battle and to make sure that we're reaching out to those legislators, but more importantly, to their constituents. It's about building the grassroots support so that legislators know that they have to understand that environmental challenges impact their local communities. The effects are very local. And when they hear from local folks, I think it is very, very powerful. So groups like the NRDC Action Fund are extremely important now, more than ever, to be engaged in the political process so that people understand that there are folks who care deeply about the environment and there are electoral consequences if they undermine the protections to safe water, to clean air, things that most of us take for granted, but know that if we don't fight for it, we could lose it very quickly.